To be here speaking about the African nationalism text, and I'm also very overjoyed that it's back in stock as a third edition, and it makes very important reading for both political theorists, historians, but really for anybody interested in learning about Zimbabwe and Africa and sort of the growth of political thought within those spaces in the modern era. Now, conceived in an era of remarkable uncertainty and hope for the continent, African nationalism belongs to the same cohort of works such as Frantz Fanon's The Wretched of the Earth, Kwame Nkrumah's Africa Must Unite and Neocolonialism and so forth, right? And other post-colonialist visionaries whose ideas accompanied the African masses into battle against imperialism. A simultaneously triumphant and tragic read, the Reverend's musings in African nationalism are as important now as they were 6 decades ago, even as the nature of said importance continues to evolve, right? The contemporary relevance of the book, I would argue, rests on 4 fundamental contributions to the enduring epistemology on African nationalism. And these 4 contributions are as follows: history, theory, prophecy, and agents, and I'll take you through each one how I envision them. The first one of these is simple enough, right? Sithole not only succeeds in historicizing the evolutionary road that led to the surge of African nationalism in the post-World War era, his work represents a canonical stamp on the historical moment of uprising. He captures the ideas, texts, and rhetoric that embodied the high point of nationalism. So that is to say, this book is both historic, right, and historical in that it tells the history, but historic because it time steps. Think about this. This is in the 1950s when this book first comes out. We're only a few years removed from the Second World War. We're still pre the rise of ZANU and ZAPU and so forth. So this is a very pivotal moment that the Reverend inserts himself and asserts himself in Zimbabwean history in particular, but African history in general, and post-colonial history, anti-colonial history, I mean. The second contribution is closely linked to the first. In addition to telling the story of how we got into the era of African nationalism and the era itself, Sithole presents us with a working definition of nationalism in colonial Africa and lays out various considerations through which we are supposed to theorize the idea and reality thereof. One of my favorite parts of the book is when he's talking about how Pan-Africanism and nationalism, which other people have posed as being fundamental opposites, he talks about them as being 2 sides of the same coin, right? And I like how he theorizes that. Now, while the first 2 contributions, the history and the theory, are staples of the nationalistic canon, the last 2 are what distinguish African nationalism. 6 decades after its publication and 4 since the advent of independence, the book continues to present the reader with critical questions pertaining to the conceptualization of the contemporary African nation. Should the continent seek to retain relations and model its rule after Western capitalist democracies, or venture out east? Maybe even consider like pre-colonial forms of governance? Can true Pan-Africanism and localized nationalism coexist? If the ontology of African nationalism is inherently rooted in its opposition to European colonialism, what then is the African nation in the post-colonial era? Is it just a reaction to Europe? All right, to external forces? It's a very important question. In fact, I also love the part when he talks about moving away from a Eurocracy to an Afrocracy, right? But that still begs the question that if you're basing your nation on moving away from something, doesn't that something still control how you move, right? These are very important questions. These are but some of the pressing questions that Sithole, whether by design or by default, puts before the contemporary reader now, as it did in 1959 when the first edition came out and 1967 when the second edition came out. Finally, there is the matter of agency. The 21st century reader will inevitably look to read beyond the history and ideas put forth by yesteryear thinkers. They want to know who the man or woman who theorized African nationalism was and what experiences and environment shaped their worldview. In not only beginning the book, right, with a detailed autobiography, but also injecting his experiences into his interrogations in later sections, Sithole allows us critical insight into how African nationalism, the book, conceptually came to be relative to his positionality. Ndabaningi Sithole's ideas are as relevant now as they have ever been. While revisionist scholars may look to posit him as a relic of a bygone era, I believe his ideas remain an important window into the historic rise of African nationalism and a platform upon which contemporary debates thereof can be held. So, again, I'm in love with this book. It's a book that I assign to all my upper level and graduate students. It's a book that I read every other year just to, again, as part of a canon that features other amazing African history. And indeed, the Reverend has earned his rightful place within that library. Yeah, you know, it's an amazing book, and thank you for the opportunity to share my thoughts on it.
What is important is what we discuss together as delegations from Zimbabwe. That includes African delegations as well as the white delegation. It is not what Smith wants us to do that matters, but what matters is what we as delegations of Zimbabwe agree upon. And Mr. Smith does not seem to like that, and therefore I cannot see Mr. Smith suggesting to the conference anything which is not acceptable to him. And we cannot accept any plan which does not give us immediate